Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk. Back again with you guys for another show, for another episode of our tactical breakdown series, a show in which we break down things analytically and statistically. And usually this is more so to do with sort of players that have been linked to the Arsenal, could be joining, have joined in the case of Partey, of course. And we looked at Nikolai Moller, one of our young 18-year-old Swedish forwards. But today we're going to look at Partey again in a slightly different fashion and kind of as a bigger picture, if you will, and kind of look into what the impact on the Arsenal midfield might be and how Arteta could set up with the Ghanaian in there. So without further ado, let's crack on. So to start off the video, what I thought we would do is look into the formations and how this is going to affect things. The main bulk of this video is about formations. Before we do that, I just want to say, still recovering from illness, so apologies if there are any coughs during our live broadcast. Of course, as I said last time, the wonders of going live. I would also like to say, if you haven't checked out already, a link in the description is to our website where Owen Young, our fantastic writer, has put up a biographical piece of Mikel Arteta. He's done an amazing series looking at the likes of Xhaka. Has he done El Neni yet? I'm not sure if he has done El Neni. But he's done the likes of Willian and Gabriel as well. So make sure you go and check that one out. We're going to get him doing an El Neni one, that's for sure. But please make sure you go and check that out. And yeah, it's an absolute pleasure to speak to you guys in the live chat as well, looking through your comments. I can't wait to get involved and see some of your thoughts on today's video. So to start off, this is kind of what we see at the moment of what could happen. Arsenal have been setting up all season with a 3-4-3 until we saw the game against Sheffield United. I'm speaking about this in the league, of course. Arsenal switched to a back four with the midfield three. And I think that we know that Arteta wants in the long term to be able to do this, to switch from a three at the back to a midfield three, which is obviously behind a front three, which is already happening. But it's the defensive side of things that have been unable to really change because of the kind of the lack of defensive quality in the midfield, shielding that back four and enabling our wing backs to get forward, still leaving just the two players back to defend when we are inevitably counter-attacked at times. But the thing is with Partey is then, and this is kind of what's different to the Houssem Aouar side of things, is that if we'd have signed Houssem Aouar, there would have been no real opportunity for Arsenal to continue playing with this 3-4-3 formation if we wanted to play him. Because Aouar in a 3-4-3 would mean partnering with one of Xhaka or Ceballos or El Neni. And, well, I mean, I think he can play a deeper role. But again, that deeper role has to be in a populated midfield, typically with three of them. And I'm not sure that Aouar is going to fit a 3-4-3 formation. And if he does, I don't think he's playing centrally. If he is playing in a 3-4-3, I think you're looking at Aouar playing on either of the flanks, most likely the left-hand side where he's more comfortable. But bringing in Partey enables Arteta the option to continue with the 3-4-3 formation if he wants to. Now, you can see from the highlighted area there that if he does do that, it's going to be using most of the middle part of the pitch. And two players covering that large of a part of the pitch does become a problem at times. You can get overawed in midfield. You can get outnumbered. And that's where often the wider men like Bellerin and Maitland-Niles in this example have to cut inside and help populate that midfield so that they compete. Now, I also think that in the long term, Arteta is going to switch to a midfield three. And the biggest question is, who are those midfield three, first of all, going to be? Who are the best midfield three? Now, I know that you can chop and change and rotate depending on your opposition, but I think what's also important is to identify the strongest midfield three that we have right now. So when we look at those three players, in my opinion, the ones that you're looking at mainly are Thomas Partey and Dani Ceballos. Partey comes in as our most expensive midfield signing after Mesut Ozil, who joined for about £42 million. Since then, we've obviously signed a lot of forward players for a lot of money, likes of Lacazette, Pepe, Aubameyang, etc. But previously to Partey, the most expensive midfielder that we bought besides Ozil was Granit Xhaka at between 30 and 35 million pounds. So already there, you've got an 80 million pound midfield just with those two players. And then you bring in Ceballos, who of course is on loan right now. But if you were to value Ceballos as a player based on his performances last season, where he's coming from with Real Madrid, you're looking at a player that's probably worth between 25 and 30 million pounds. So you're looking at a midfield there that is worth over 100 million in terms of their market value from when they were purchased, let's say. I know Granit Xhaka, a lot of you don't think he's worth £35 million. I don't think he's worth £35 million anymore. I think his stock has probably dropped below £30 million, to be honest. But whatever you think of him, he is still an exceptionally important player to what Arteta wants to do in the midfield, and is far and away, before Partey came in, our best midfielder. So he's obviously going to be in there. And the Spaniard is a very, very versatile player that's learned to play a lot deeper in this Arteta midfield as well. So if we have a look at the different kinds of formations that we can now field with these three in practice. So the first one is to play with a 4-3-3 with Thomas Partey playing as the deepest of those midfield three. Granit Xhaka categorically is not a defensive midfielder. He's not a centre defensive midfielder. That is not his position. He's never been that player. Deep line playmaker is a term that a lot of people like to say that he is, but actually he is a centre midfield player. That is Granit Xhaka's best position. As a lot of people highlight, he's too slow on the turn sometimes to get back and defend. If he is caught out isolated on his own at the back, he gets most of the time turned and done and ran past. And that's because you can't leave Granit Xhaka isolated. Thomas Partey has played in the deepest part of the midfield for Atletico at times really successfully. In their very fluid 4-4-2 formation, he can often be the more deeper of himself or Saul or Koke, whoever plays in that midfield, Marcos Llorente when he came in initially. But Thomas Partey is going to be playing probably as the most disciplined player. And something that they talked about at Atletico Madrid was the way that Thomas Partey was kind of shackled in what he was doing under Simeone. He had to play a very disciplined role that wasn't as expressive as maybe he wanted it to be. But actually, what Thomas Partey can do is play in a lot more of a fluid position. And that kind of leads into the next option, which is as a flat midfield three, rather than the sweeper role that Partey would be playing. I think the sweeper role kind of negates a lot of what Partey can give to the team. Now, if you play with a flat midfield three, what you might get actually is looking at these three players working in complete harmony and complete synergy, all having a very similar role, but knowing to cover each other's backs once one goes forward, once one gets back. Xhaka can get forward to a much, much lesser extent than the other two can, but he has that in his locker to play those incisive balls through the middle of the park, but it's not as successful as the other two. So typically what you would be seeing is Partey and Ceballos pushing further forward than Granit Xhaka. But on the defence, this would become a solid midfield three that was flat and would be defending in front of the back four, giving plenty of defensive cover. Of those three, Ceballos would probably be given the most freedom to get forward, but we know what Thomas Partey is like when he's got the ball at his feet. He drives it forward, he pushes into the final third of the opposition's half, and he gets that ball into places where chances can be created, attacks can be spurned, and I think that's obviously what Arsenal want to try and do. Now, the final option that I want to suggest to you is my preferred option, and that's in a 4-2-3-1 style midfield or a 4-3-3 with a number 10 style player. Now, this requires a lot more coaching and a lot more tactical awareness from all of these players. Granit Xhaka would still be able to press slightly, but nowhere near as much as his counterpart on the other side of the pitch, Thomas Partey. Thomas Partey's abilities of getting forward have been shackled at Atletico Madrid quite a lot, and it's still really visible what he's been able to do in that midfield position, even in a position which is very highly disciplined under a Simeone coaching tactic. If you put him into an Arteta-style team, you might see Thomas Partey getting a lot further forward than you typically would. Ceballos, our number 8, playing as a number 10 here, has done that previously really effectively. If you listen to the interview that I did with Alvaro Romeo, what we talked about with Dani Ceballos was him at Real Betis, the way that he played passes between the lines, played those incisive key moves in between the defensive players to get those balls to his front men at the time. Ruben Castro, for instance, Yakin and these types of players really benefited from having Ceballos there in the team and providing those passes for them. And I think that what this does and what this enables Arsenal to be is a lot more attacking, a lot more offensive, and really importantly, a lot more centrally creative. Something that Arsenal have lacked significantly is the ability to create chances in the middle of the pitch. And really, that's something that Arsenal have really struggled with. But actually, what we could see from Ceballos specifically is what he's learned over the course of the last season, playing in a deeper midfield role, is a better tactical awareness of the game to know when to drop, to know when to cover, to know when not to stay high up the pitch and leaving us caught when we are on the defensive. And I think playing someone like Dani Ceballos there, for instance, actually gives you a lot more defensive cover for a number 10 than you would usually see from anyone else in that position, possibly in the league. So there's my thoughts on the different types of formations that we could possibly see for Arsenal. I think that there's lots of opportunities for Arsenal to use this and to try and use the different ways in which we can field these players. Now, what I've said there is obviously using just the three players of Partey, Xhaka and Ceballos. Now, Arsenal's midfield options are limited, but as Mark says here, could you play Willian at 10? 100% you could. And actually, it's something that I really would like to see, is Willian playing in that number 10 role. I think it's something that you would say for some of the lesser sides first to initially practice. And I think when you come up against some of them sort of the Wolves, the Evertons, these types of sides that are pushing for that top six, not quite getting there so far. Everton looking really strong. They're the type of sides that you play more Ceballos. Ceballos being in there who can actually tackle further up the pitch, win the ball high up the pitch as well, a lot more effectively than what Willian can. And I think it's ultimately you do need to rotate. You do need to change players based upon the opposition, but you don't want to go too far. You don't want to go down the Unai Emery route of changing so many players when actually all you need to do is kind of change one or two to really match the opposition. And I think that's really key when you move forward and you're thinking about the types of teams that you're going to set up with against the big oppositions like Manchester City, like Chelsea, like Liverpool, etc. I still would like to see Arsenal be tactically astute that they could switch back to, say, a 3-4-3 that worked so effectively well against Chelsea and Manchester City in the games in the FA Cup last season. And what I mentioned at the beginning of the video was so great about this is that you put someone like Thomas Partey in that midfield four with Bellerin, Maitland-Niles or Saka, whoever it is, in that flat midfield four in a 3-4-3, and it still works. And ultimately, it's an upgrade on what we've had previously with Ceballos or El Neni playing in that role. Let's get a few more of your comments in the chat as well. I know I've gone through and talked quite a bit, so it's good to get some of your comments as well. Christopher Fung says, I like the flat midfield three. It may be easier to transition to focus on zones opposed to more areas of the pitch that you would see a traditional 4-3-3 or a 4-2-3-1. And it would work well too, 100%. The flat three requires, as I said, it requires a lot of synergy between the players, a lot of mental side of the game being improved and them understanding each other in their roles and when you need to cover, when you need to go, when you need to run, the type of passes that you need to play. And all of that's really important. Carl Halberg says, unfortunately, converting Saka to a cam is going to take a whole season. And I think that is a strong point. Because if you look at what Saka's currently doing, playing either as this kind of left wing back role or playing as a right winger, when he's played centrally, he can be free, but he can also be very absent for a lot of the game. And Saka's one of those players that you want to keep in the game for as long as possible. Now, I'm not saying that Saka couldn't play that number 10 position. I think there's a really big chance that he could do. But I actually think that what we've got in Willian and what we've got in Ceballos is options that are a lot more consistent and a lot more ready and free-flowing already to do that straight away, rather than trying to transition a player like Saka to play 10 from the start of the season. I just think it's more important. Gary Hardy also says that Emile Smith-Rowe could also fit nicely into the midfield as that cam, and I agree with him. I think when you're seeing the Europa League games and we're coming up against these sides like Rapid Vienna, like Dundalk, and there's one more team that's completely gone out of my mind, Mulder, isn't it? And when you're looking at those types of games, and maybe round 3 of the FA Cup when it comes around in the new year, those are the games that you're going to be able to see Emile Smith-Rowe playing. And hopefully, when he's fully fit, get enough games that he can show a really strong performance in those fixtures. I'd love to see Emile Smith-Rowe playing as that number 10. And hopefully, he's got a future at the club, but he still needs to kind of show it on the biggest of stages to prove that he can do it in the Arsenal senior setup. Owen says, I don't think Arteta cares about what it says on the team sheet. His setups are so fluid. And that's 100% true. What we actually see, and kind of that bleeds into what we were talking about with the midfield three being flat, is that if you play with a flat midfield three, it's really fluid. On the defensive side, what you saw against Sheffield United is we actually saw Mohamed El Neni drop into the back three a lot at the start of the game. He was really dropping in and creating a back three of himself, David Luiz, and Gabriel. So that still may happen. I doubt that it will happen as much on the right-hand side. I don't see him using Thomas Partey as a player and saying to him, look, when we're on the defensive, you need to be dropping into a right centre-back slot. I don't see that happening with Partey. He's not the type of player to tell that, to just give him that sentence of having to go back into the back three. I don't think he's going to be necessarily the best player to do that with. Granit Xhaka on the other side, 100%. And maybe that's something that you would do, is that you would say Partey's always going to sit in the midfield. When we're on the defensive, Xhaka drops in, Gabriel goes central, David Luiz goes slightly further right. And I think that's possibly something that you would see being more fluid. Martinique says, what do you think about Saliba going on loan? I think it's a great idea. He needs to get minutes. He needs to get time. There's a lot of pressure on him right now. Get him playing. Get him playing week in, week out at a team that he can learn at, a team that he can get minutes for. And the Championship is a great competitive league for him to be able to learn his trade. If you wanted him to come in this season, you're going to be disappointed. And if you wanted him to come this season, I think it was a little bit naive to think he might come straight in, play week in, week out. And by the end of the season, we've got an amazing partnership with Gabriel. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think that was ever going to happen. I genuinely thought that we might see him playing, say, the Cup games or the Europa League games, but it was going to be a long, long time before you see him starting for Arsenal. So the amount of people that I saw them putting in their like predicted lineups for the first game of the season, it was never going to happen. Never going to happen. This guy has had hardly any football because he's been injured of most of last season. He played a fair few games. I think he got just under 1,000 minutes or something like that in Liga. The Liga season was curtailed early. And then they went and he had 4 or 5 months until the season restarted that he hadn't played football for. He couldn't play in the French Cup final. And for that reason, it's completely fair enough that we send Saliba out on loan, get him playing regularly. And I'm absolutely fine with that. Absolutely fine with that. Although from what I've seen, I don't see it being Brentford. From speaking to someone I know who's very sort of ingrained with the thoughts around Brentford, he was saying that Pontus Janssen plays that right centre-back role at the moment and is not going to be moved by Saliba at this point. It doesn't make much sense for them to sort of loan in someone to take over that position right now. So I'd be very surprised if it was Brentford. Watford, maybe that makes more sense. So I'm not that ingrained with Watford. I don't know as much. Maybe I have to chase up some leads on it. But I don't know too much about Watford in terms of where he would play. But I think that's a really good chance because you're at a side in Watford that are going to be pushing. Hopefully they're trying to get back into the Premier League. And so maybe that gives them a really good opportunity to play someone like Saliba in a more attacking style, but a team that needs to be dominant in games and use those centre-backs really, really well. Deep House said he's 19, he's going through a bereavement. I hope he gets on okay, 100%. Chris says, Alba is not injured, he is fine and has been training at London Colney. I think it's really great to see the fact that he's been sort of kept out of the Gabonese team. It's just not necessary to play him in those games. If there's a risk to it, you keep him out. It's as simple as that. Chris says, looking ahead, though, at the fixture list, when would you start experimenting with a back four lineup? I mean, it's tough, isn't it? Because we've got some really, really difficult fixtures against Manchester City, against Manchester United. We've got Spurs coming up at some point, I think, as well. It's really tough to say, when are we going to get these games in? When are we going to try and go to this back four? I want to see the 3-4-3 against Manchester City with Partey playing in that midfield four. Like I said, I think that that's the best option right now. But ultimately, there's a long, long, long way to go before we can start playing the back four against these big, big teams. That's just how I feel on it. That is where I'm going to wrap up today's show. I'm starting my shift in 10 minutes, so make sure you head over to 101 Great Goals to see the content that's coming out of there in the next 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours or so. But it's been a pleasure to speak to you, as always is. A massive thank you to our members, as always. Thank you guys for being so great and helping to support the channel. So many of you there. Glenn Alasola, PMHK, Mike, Zamir, Afnan, Grassroot, Abdullah, Dial Square, Mosaic, Chris, Jasmine, Avon, Victor, Robert, Iron, Daniel, Ashwin, Mahir, Emmanuel, MRT, Jack Perry, Johnny Boy. Our good Johnny Boy loves his tactical breakdowns. Freddie, Callum, TD Shifts, Deep House, Tomodo 010, Christopher, Guna Seb, Delbert, fantastic name, Jet KS, Javier, Adam, Alfie, Nathan, Tony, and Dave. We hope it's to John. We hope that J stands for John. It'd be great. Lennon. Fantastic stuff there. And of course, a massive thank you to our TGT ambassadors as well. You've been a huge help. And thank you to you guys, the real Janice, Alex, Gary, Brian, Carl, Owen, Aaron, Jared, Rohit, Easy Isle, Matt Gray, and Jimmy22 Gibbo. Thank you ever so much, guys, for the continued support on the channel. I hope you're enjoying yourselves in the Discord server too. If you would like to help join up and help support the channel, really appreciate everyone that does so. You get access to so much exclusive content. You can use your emojis in the chat box. You get priority messages in the chat box as well. And of course, we also look forward to giving you more exclusive content and the Discord server where you get a daily chat about football all the time, 24 hours a day. There's plenty of people in there and they're all great and they're all fantastic. Thank you ever so much, guys, for tuning in. I will see you again very, very soon. And as always, up the Arsenal.